This is the Writers Podcast, a Writers After Dark radio production, bringing you the best in writing advice, news, trends, and interviews. Hosted by award-winning authors S.K. Anthony and Raymond Esposito.
Hey, welcome back to the Writers Podcast. I'm Raymond Esposito, and I'm here with my co-host, S. Catherine Anthony. Catherine, how are you?
You know, I'm okay. I'm still suffering from my emotional distress over Hurricane Irma.
Yeah, how was that? How was that for you?
It was so tough.
Yeah.
I'm barely living through it, but you know, I'm in New York, so I don't know. How about you? How are you doing there in Florida?
So I was actually in it, and maybe I'm less emotionally. Maybe I'm just suffering from hurricane PTSD in some way. I'm probably more aggravated just over the cleanup that I have to do.
Yes, well, the thing is, you didn't have power, so you didn't go through what I went through.
That's true. I was
following the path of Hurricane Irma. So, yeah, I suffered more than you did.
Yeah, and it certainly set us back in what we're doing. It's amazingly difficult to prepare, record, and edit a podcast when you don't have power.
Which is why you're in for a treat today. We decided that we're going to just take it easy and surprise each other with random questions. We figured it's time for you guys to get to know us better.
Yeah, I think one of the inspirations behind that was we had so much fun talking to so many different authors about what they do. And the conversation was, I don't think we've ever devoted more than a couple of minutes. We talk about writing, but I don't think we've ever devoted more than a couple of minutes talking about us. So I do like the random question idea to see if we can take what we dished out a few weeks ago.
Yes, so welcome to the me episode of the Writers Podcast.
It's the Me Podcast, brought to you by Writers After Dark and Vodka.
So Raymond, my first question.
I'm first. All right. Okay.
My first question for you is very intellectual. Who was your favorite Spice Girl? I'm kidding.
Oh, all right.
I don't think you even know who they are.
I had an answer.
But speaking of music, sort of, if you could choose an intro song to play every time you walked into a room, what would it be?
Let's see. The funny side of me would say You're So Vain by Carly Simon, because I'm not really vain, but it would be funny if that was the intro song. I think I would go with AC/DC, if For Those About to Rock, We Salute You. I just like the song. I think it's cool. And I do kind of cause trouble everywhere I go, so I think it fits.
You sure do. Our editor, Linda Dietz, she's a church lady, as we call her, because, she loves to go to church. And she once asked me that question, and I told her that my intro song would be Bow Chicka Bow Wow. And she turned pretty red.
Are you a repressed porn star?
No, but it was fun to tell her that.
Right. Oh, got it.
I don't actually have one.
Every time I say the church lady, I just think of Saturday Night Live. Well, isn't that special? All right. Well, my first question is a little bit more serious. I didn't know we were going with that. That was an excellent question. I just didn't know we were going so light.
No, that was a light one. They're not all light.
All right. So here's mine. And you'll have to excuse a little bit longer introduction to it. But
sorry, before we get into that, this is exactly what we discuss all the time. It's where I want to joke around and he wants to be serious, and we try to always mix it up. So this is a perfect example of...
I think that works. I think it works better on video. I mean, I think I think I'm always a little bit more light on the video, but yeah, I do have my professor side. So here is my deep analytical question. You were born in Venezuela and learned English when you arrived in the U.S. in your teens. Now, if you went back and rewrote your novels in Spanish, what would be the most difficult aspects of that? I'll call it a back translation.
I think now it would be such a difficult task. I would first say it in Spanish, translate it into English, and then translate back. I don't know. It would be difficult. You see, I spent so much of the past 20 years or more learning English and learning the rules that you kind of forget a little bit of the original language rule? Like, I know it because I speak it, but can I actually follow the same rules in a book in Spanish? No, because they have different rules. Like, they don't use quotation marks or anything like that. They use the M dash.
So for you, your ability to communicate in Spanish is like most people's in English. Most people, everybody in the country who was born here speaks English, but they can't necessarily write a book because, writing a book requires understanding rules and storytelling and things like that. So you're saying you'd suffer the same thing trying to write a book in Spanish.
Yes, I think so.
Interesting.
I like practice. I would have to watch a lot more telenovelas and read a lot more Spanish books. But even then, the translation to books are a little different from regular talk. They're a lot more formal. So
I did have to read modern Spanish short stories. Fascinating, but difficult for an English-born speaker to. But I did learn in college. I learned to speak Spanish watching a soap opera, which was, I think, probably the best way to learn because their grammar and all those verb tenses are just as difficult.
So, but you're saying it's easier to learn it while you're seeing they had Spanish girls with their.
Yes, because they don't put, you talk about bias in television, they don't put anyone on television who's not hot. I mean, all of their, there's no diversity in Spanish television when I was watching it. It was all hot people.
Okay, so I've always felt, thanks to Scooby-Doo, that humans are the real monsters of the world. But Raymond, you're an author and a psychologist. Would you say part of the reason you love writing is because it allows you to explore the doors open to you by the study of human nature?
Yes. To the first part of that question, and I appreciate you asking because you know how passionate I am about the idea. I don't appreciate horror movies or even stories that have a monster, but it turns out that the real monster is man, because I don't necessarily agree with that sentiment, and I also don't think that's the place. I think that's kind of a cop-out. I think that's an easy zombie movies that turn into, and I love The Walking Dead, but let's face it, Negan is a worse monster than the zombies. I don't use horror stories to explore how bad humans are. I use horror stories to explore human character and how strong or weak people are when you're in that worst case scenario, but not to simply make them monsters.
I like that.
Speaking of TV, experts are constantly telling us that we should shut off the television because it is a mindless time suck for our children, for our own productivity, etc., etc. But it did provide you with a very different experience. Television was very helpful. Tell us about how you learned to speak English.
So I came here and I was very inspired, obviously, to learn English because I hate failing, and I hated feeling behind in. I hated feeling behind, like in school. So I had a Spanish and English dictionary, and I would videotape the Friends show. Mm-hmm. So while watching Friends, I would listen to what they're saying, and then I would look up the words, and I learned English really by watching Friends and translating it as I went. Obviously, at first, I was pausing every 2 minutes because I didn't know what they were saying. But eventually, I got less and less. And along with that, I got their quirky humor. I still think Smelly Cat is a funny song. I have number 3. I have 2 options. You can choose. Either something personal or something about books.
Oh, we did the book thing. Let's go personal. It's like Truth or Dare.
Yes. Did you ever screw something up badly and no one ever found out that it was you?
I screwed up something badly and everybody found out it was me. I don't know if that's a cop-out to the question, but I can tell you the story because I actually used to use the story when I was doing criminal interviews. And it's a true story, and that's why I told it, and it's a story about accepting responsibility. It was Christmas Day. I must have been 17 years old, and we had gotten a lot of snow the night before, or enough to cover the windshield, the back window of my car, which was parked next to my father's brand new to him Cadillac Fleetwood. I mean, this was kind of his dream car. This was the car he had always aspired to own. He owned it. The one thing about my car at that time, it was a 1970 Ford Maverick and it had no heat. So I get in the car. We were leaving Christmas Day to go to some friend's house. It was going to be cold in the car, and it was certainly cold outside, and I didn't bother to wipe off the window. and I backed out. And as I was backing out, the car slid, and I slid into his brand new Cadillac and kept going, pulling off some of the fender decoration thing there. And I kept going. And I get to my friend's house, and, my dad's coming there too. And he's like, whatever, 15, 20 minutes behind me. And I'm looking out the window, and I see him get out of the car, and he is holding that piece of molding that my car had torn off. And I was upstairs at my friend's house, and I had to make that. It was the longest walk down the hallway, down the stairs too. We laugh about it now. My father still loves to tell that story. But yeah, that's one of those things you look back and you go, all you had to do was like clear off the window.
Yes.
So, the first part of your question, I guess, I don't know if I've ever screwed up something people don't know about, but that was a screw up that everybody knew about.
So, always a wordsmith. He's even changing my question.
I did change your question because you caught me off guard with that. I'd have to think if I did, and then I'd have to think if it was something I'd actually reveal beyond if I start telling you about the bodies. If you could jump in a time machine and travel back and steal a book idea as your own, which book would it be, and how bad would you feel about that?
I would feel pretty bad, but probably, of course, I'm going to go with the Harry Potter one, but I would steal all 7. Let's not be crazy now.
Yeah. Well, once you're in front of her, you might as well stay there.
Here's the thing. No, the thing with why that one is okay. Sorry, J.K. Rowling. But why that one is okay, it's, if you go back and you steal one novel and then you come back, people expect you to keep writing.
Yeah. Exactly
like that and keep wowing them. In J.K. Rowling's case, nobody really wants to get past those 7 books, so I'm cool with that. I'll get those, steal those. And
I'd be happy being done with that being my career.
Yeah.
You wouldn't feel any guilt about leaving her to be a poor single mom in London?
You know what? I'd hook her up.
Yeah. And she'd be happy. And she gets $1 million gift.
Out of nowhere.
She wouldn't know that she was supposed to be entitled to a theme park.
But I know her story, so I would have to help her. Exactly.
Yeah, we'll give you a job there.
God, imagine.
It could be a job.
Okay, so now, Raymond, and please don't hold back. Tell us, how do you feel about paranormal romance?
Yeah.
Or paranormal novels, really?
I think they're so heartfelt. Absolutely hate them. And for all the reasons that a dark fiction author should hate them, and maybe hate is a strong word. First of all, they take our monsters, and probably worse than making humans the bad guys is making monsters the good guys. And werewolves aren't soft, misunderstood lovers. They're psycho killers. Vampires are soulless. They're not just misunderstood. So everything about paranormal romance, maybe if you're doing something with a ghost, that's fine. But they take our beloved monsters in the horror genre, and they just turn them upside down. I respect paranormal writers, obviously, just not a fan of what they do with my genre. They've hijacked it.
So you don't like sparkling vampires?
Without teeth. No, yeah, no. Like we have a hard enough time selling to the public, right? Horror writers just have it's one of the most difficult genres to write in. It has such a small audience. And now you're competing with people who throw your monsters on their book covers, embracing their lover. It's infuriating. So people can't tell by your public persona, but you are a pretty hardcore introvert. And in the past several years, however, you've really put yourself out there, not only with books, but doing the video series and, of course, this podcast. What makes an introvert do it? How do you deal with it? And what would you tell other introverts who are thinking about being a little bit more out there?
So the first part of your question is people don't really know because I'm an introvert. It's because I'm an introvert. They still don't know.
Right.
And how do you get me to do it? Well, with a nagging partner who won't shut up about, let's do this. So my secret is Raymond Esposito.
Yes, I obviously got you caught up in the emotions of it. Let's do this, and it sounded exciting. But then you have, or for the past couple of years,
I know.
you've had to sit down in front of the mic.
Want the videos more. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all part of being creative, right? Mm-hmm. It is fun to try something new, to open yourself up, and if you don't take a risk, there's no way to know what can happen. It is fun for me because I love creativity. I love the storytelling, and everything we do, we put a little bit of storytelling in it. So even when we do the videos, it's that. When we're doing the podcast, even if it's not obvious to the audience, to us, we know what we're doing and we know why we're doing it, and why we're saying the way we present the topic in the moment. It's, we're practicing our storytelling. Mm-hmm. So it's just a different medium. It's more exposed, but at the same time, I feel okay because it's not live. So I can always hide behind the idea that we can edit that.
Yeah.
That's my security blanket, knowing that it can be edited.
Interesting.
But once it's out there, I still love it. It's great. While writing your books, did you experience any moments that shocked you from your own writing or from your story or research?
I think the biggest shock to me was that I could actually write a novel. That was the in my first book, that was the biggest shock. I was a short story writer, a business writer, and I was shocked by how much story I found. I never thought I could write a full novel. I never even understood how people did it. It scared the hell out of me to think about trying to come up with 70 to 80,000 words. The closest I'd ever come was like 12,000. And so that was an absolute shock as I wrote You and Me Against the World, and just more and more. And not only that, but I had the ending written, and I still haven't published the ending because that one novel has turned into 4. And I'm hoping I can insert that into what is the final book. So that was a big shock that I could even do it.
I know it's your turn to ask me a question, but you kind of gave me a segue there to my 8th question. So I'm just going to skip ahead. When you first started writing You and Me Against the World, you posted it in parts online.
Yes.
Did you make any big changes from the online version to the published version, and why?
Yes, I made 2, what I would consider, besides editing, I made 2 major changes. The first was when I published it online, every chapter opened with specific lyric from the song I was listening to in the scene. If you looked at those lyrics and what went with it, it was explanatory almost. It was, the theme behind what was being written. And obviously that had to be removed for the book because it would be impossible to use anybody's lyrics. The second big difference was I moved 2 chapters when the book went into publication. So what was chapter 5 in the original, I think that became like chapter 3. I literally did that big of a switch. Those characters just needed to be introduced earlier.
Oh.
So like most writers, you started young penning stories. When did you decide on urban fantasy, and where did you first develop a love for all things superhero?
It's funny to say now because the movie just came out and it's pretty popular, but so in Venezuela growing up, they didn't have Halloween. So you didn't have like a costume thing. Around February, they had the carnival. They do the parades and whatnot. And that's when the kids had an opportunity to dress up. But I think I had like maybe 3 years in a row that I was Wonder Woman. I loved imagining that I was...
Where were you exposed to Wonder Woman?
TV. They had TV.
The cartoon or the Linda Carter?
Linda Carter.
Really?
And the cartoon. They had both.
See,
but my memory goes back to Linda Carter, though.
So one of the most fascinating things is, as you and I got to talking and know each other, one of the most fascinating things to me was, in age, we're separated by 15 years. But because you grew up in Venezuela, you watched the same television programs that I watched as a kid. For your age, you shouldn't be aware of the shows that I watched because by then they were onto their own. But that delay, which is apparently 15 or 20 years, I also watched Linda Carter's Wonder Woman as a kid.
Now everything is instant, so that doesn't apply anymore. Yeah, but back then it did. So yeah, I watched that, and I did also watch the cartoons. I also love Superman and any Spider-Man, any of those superhero ones I love. But Bionic Woman. I always liked the idea of the power, the woman and the female power and whatnot. So it was those. I grew up loving that, loving the idea that you can be a hero while having powers, and although I use it differently in the books, but still.
And you and Linda Carter do have one feature in common.
Which is what?
You both have dark hair.
Okay. So, what was an early experience where you learned the language had power?
So I can really go deep on this one. Yeah, what the hell, we'll go deep. This is such a personal reveal because when I learned that language had power, it also set the course for me understanding the power of lies and probably in some way impacted the career direction that I went into. And this may be way too heavy for this podcast, but it's a good question, so I'll just answer it honestly. My parents were divorced when I was like 6 or 7 years old, about 7 years old. And unfortunately for me, my bedroom, the window was sort of right next to the front door, so to speak. So, and I happened to be privy at that age to the final conversation that my parents had on that doorstep. So I heard the reasons for the separation, which was, quite simply that my father had, found somebody else. So I knew it was coming. And the next day when my mother explained that story to us that, my father had left. But my father came back shortly after because my mom was having an operation, and then he was there during her recovery. And then one day he just left again. And she said to us when he came back, the reason that he left is because he felt we didn't love him enough. So we had to show him while he was there a lot of love and attention. And she got very upset when he left and blamed us. So what I learned about the power of language and all of that is how people use it to really protect themselves. The power of language is how often we use it for denial. My mother was just having a hard time facing the fact that she had been left for another woman. Completely understandable. What wasn't understandable was to pass that, to use language in that way, to pass on your guilt and your sense of defeat onto your children. My brothers didn't know anything other than that was the truth. But me, even at that age, that was the fall of innocence, because at that age I understood the person I need to love and trust the most is basically putting their baggage off on us. And it changed the trajectory of both my life and my brother's life, and the things we grew up to believe. So at a very early age, I understood the power that words have and the responsibility that we have and how we use them.
Yeah.
Is that too deep for a podcast?
You didn't have to answer, but you answered, and we appreciate honesty. Obviously, we're trying to get to know, or let the readers get to know us.
So, speaking of honest, obviously you're an intelligent woman, you're an excellent writer, but you also have an accent. Do you ever worry that because of certain biases, people might not read your books if they hear your accent?
All the time. I think that was my number one reason for not wanting to do the podcast. I still feel that way, not just because of the book. Regardless of how much the world has changed, and it's still changing, you still find the judgment. There's the negativity, no matter what. The biggest thing is they'll hear my accent and they'll be like, well, why do you think you can write a novel in English?
Right.
I have gotten the question, and it feels terrible. It feels horrible just because I cannot pronounce certain words the right way. Doesn't mean I don't know how to put them together and how to spell them. But anyway, yes.
See, I grew up with when I was a kid, I had a speech impediment. I had to go to speech therapy and classes to learn how to speak correctly. So I guess for me, I completely get that. I went from someone who would never wanted to speak in public because I didn't speak well, and it was something that people would make fun of, to someone who now the better part of my career speaking in public and in front of people. So I certainly get that. And, for me, I don't have that bias when I hear someone with an accent, because I'm always just like, well, SK speaks 3 languages and I speak 1. So if you really want to, if you're going to say, let's make a judgment on intelligence, then anyone who speaks more than 3 languages can claim that they're a smarter, better writer than you.
It's a struggle still. No matter what, you'll always feel insecure about it. I say you, but because I imagine I'm not the only one who goes through this. But anyway, so let's move on. Why don't you tell us which is more romantic as a horror writer, Valentine's or Halloween?
Well, obviously Halloween is. Because Valentine's is fake and it's not a real holiday. It's a Hallmark holiday.
Real.
And because thousands upon thousands of men across the country are forced to act romantic, Halloween is just, it's more real. The outfits are sexier. People are drunker. You're just having a better time. And if you don't want to participate, you can just shut off the porch light.
That's what I was waiting for.
Yes, I know you. The famous porch light conversation.
Famous porch light. I'm not necessarily into Valentine's Day or Halloween is okay. It's for the kids. I'm not able to enjoy it as an adult, really. But the one thing I'm going to tell you with both is I get chocolate either way. So they both work for me for chocolate. I don't need anything else.
You know, when you have this discussion with women, they'll always throw out the lingerie thing. But there are, the sexy lingerie on Valentine's Day. And my first thought is always, yeah, and there are a million ways that a guy can screw up ever seeing that lingerie on Valentine's. I mean, there's a million things that can go wrong that mean you're never going to get to that part. But the bigger argument is you can wear that lingerie for Halloween. And also, if you wore any of those sexy nurse, cat, vampire outfits on Valentine's Day, your guy would be just as happy as if you wore the lingerie. So I give it to Halloween. And that's not just because I'm a dark fiction writer. It's just scary is sexy. So your first book, Kinetic, won a Reader's Favorite Award, a Novel of Excellence Award, and was an Amazon bestseller. Which one of those accolades meant the most to you and why?
The award.
Yeah.
Obviously, I love the moment when my book also hit the bestseller, but on Amazon. But that leaves, that goes away, Not
in my bio,
it can
it
come
doesn't.
back, but
Don't go away in my bio, sister. I don't know what you're talking about.
I guess not, but I don't know. The awards, again, it goes back to my insecurity. Also part of the whole language thing where, you wonder, did I really know what I was doing? But everybody has the same problem where you're not even sure, like, oh my God, did I really string those words together in the right order? Should I rearrange? And you tell a story that you love, that makes sense to you. But then when other people can appreciate, the work you put in there and what you were trying to convey, that means something. It's not so much that it's the award, but it's to know that, okay, I did something. Which writer wouldn't love an award, though?
Yeah.
You have your own awards. What did you feel with your award-winning books?
The bestseller status was really cool, and I kind of liked it. But yeah, the awards were... I think the award, though, I was most excited about, which sounds ridiculous, was I won a Writer's Digest Short Story Award. I love my short stories, and short stories, how I rant about this, they don't really get enough attention. They're very difficult to sell, even in anthologies. So that one was kind of important. So the awards do make you feel validated for your writing.
Yes. You have a Nightmares world. How do you use that to connect all of your stories? So first tell us what your Nightmares world is.
So the idea for Nightmares, which is, one word, but is the Nightmares is, I always believe that it's not only our fears that come out in the dark. We also, at night by ourselves, in the dark, we really see a reflection of ourselves. Whether it's true or not, that is the part where you're by yourself, where you're within yourself. The noise of the day is over. And Nightmares was really about those reflections, those dark reflections that human beings have, their fears, their hopes, their dreams, and of course, their nightmares. And I just use that to bring all of my stories have some interconnection between them. I mean, my novels cross over with just very small things, and the short stories kind of do the same. It's sort of a world of dimensions. I can't put it any other way, but
That's it exactly.
I just always love the idea of all of my stories kind of make one big story.
You don't need one part to explain the next, but it is so cool as a fan to just see those moments when you see your old friends in another story, not necessarily... I don't want to give anything away, but they have they have the little moments, and those little moments, have a little theme to them, and they help the growth of the particular main character in the moment, and it's amazing. I love that you do that.
there's obviously challenges and rewards with being an indie author. What is it that you love most about being an indie author, and what's the thing that you like least about it?
I love having control, total control of my story, my covers, my book, my formatting. But also I like that I can hold myself accountable to being professional and to presenting a quality product. When I was in 6th grade in Venezuela, my teacher said to us, and this always stuck with me, she said, anything that you put your name on, you should be proud of. I've always carried that with me. So that goes along with the being an independent author. This is my book. I've put everything I had into it that I'm proud of it. What I like least about it is still has that negative connotation. You know, so many people still think that traditional is the only way to go. They think that independent authors are frauds or that they don't have anything good to offer. And, you know, there's so many amazing, talented independent authors out there that's just simply not true. The industry is changing. So I think that's going to go away pretty soon.
Yeah, I don't disagree that there are, and I don't mean to offend anyone, and I may be in this group, but you know, I think there are independent authors who publish and shouldn't publish. Not because there is no gatekeeper, not because they need somebody's permission to publish. They shouldn't publish because they're just not ready to publish. You pick up a book and you're like, you know, this person tells a good story, but they don't tell the story well.
Yeah.
And every time that happens, every time there's a book that people can point to and say, see, look at the garbage, it hurts the entire industry. And, you know, that's what this podcast is about. The series is all about getting your book to be the best it can be. On the other hand, you're going to tell me that traditional publishers get it right most of the time. They get it wrong most of the time. Hundreds of books in Barnes & Noble that nobody wants to read. What about Hollywood? Hollywood gets it wrong most of the time. Billions of dollars spent on movies that nobody wants to pay to see or nobody enjoys when they do see it. So I think that's the whole thing behind entertainment and art, right? Is it's all very subjective and nobody has the right to tell us not to do it.
You know, as we've said before, the only people who are maybe paying attention to that are the traditional published authors or, you know, the publishers, because really the reader has no clue who published what.
Nope.
And they don't care. They only want a great story. So my final question is a fun one, because we are writers after dark and we like to drink.
Mm-hmm. Well, don't say it like that. We sound like freaking alcoholics.
Well, you know, when we are working at night, we are pretty much alcoholics. So not that bad. But so I had to bring in a drinking question in there. What's the most money you've ever drunkenly spent? Whatever.
$586 at Groove Street for me, Cheryl, and Austin. Somehow on that thing was 16 shots of something called a water moccasin, and someone who saw it said, I don't know what a water moccasin is, but I can't imagine anybody would need 16 shots. That was probably, I had travel bills and business that were higher, but that was probably the single largest spend.
And what about the junk food that you needed?
You know, I'm a generous person. I have had parties here with the college kids and taken everyone to Denny's. But you know, the great thing about Denny's, when you go there, you know, you can bring 15 people there and still bill isn't any more than $82. So I think that was probably the most.
I enjoyed going to Denny's with you guys.
Yeah, I don't remember even paying that bill. So
did anybody pay? Oh my God!
I don't know. I just walked out after I was full, so I can't really
actually. Yes, I think you and Jeff.
Maybe.
I think everybody actually.
I don't know. We'll ask Linda. She was sober.
She was sober. Yes.
All right, so that is the episode on getting to know us, or what we like to call the Hurricane Irma Recovery Show. Yes. Next week, we will be back with the regularly scheduled broadcast.
Had we thought about it, we would have requested for you guys to ask questions you're dying to know. But we didn't. So we won't leave you with a quote because we had none.
No, because this was an unscripted, no quote type of show.
Yes.
But it was fun.
It was a fun one. So we'll see you next week. And thanks for listening. Hope you learned something very interesting about us.
And until then, we'll see you later.
Thank you for listening to the Writers Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. For more articles, news, and advice, visit our website, writersafterdark.net, or follow us on Facebook and Twitter. The Writers Podcast is a Writers After Dark radio production. Executive producers SK Anthony and Raymond Esposito. Copyright 2017.